The old man stood trembling, his wrinkled hands clutching the edge of the doorway as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes glistened with tears that had carried years of silence, sacrifice, and longing. He whispered in a voice heavy with both pain and hope, "I'm your father." But instead of compassion, the room filled with cold laughter and cruel words. His son's fiancée, draped in elegance yet poisoned with arrogance, sneered at him, humiliating the frail man who only longed to be recognized. No one knew that in the next few moments, the son himself would walk through that same door, and nothing would ever be the same again. The evening air was heavy with silence, broken only by the hesitant footsteps of an old man as he approached a large, brightly lit house. His heart pounded in his chest, not because of the distance he had walked, but because of the weight of the years he carried inside him. For so long, he had lived on the edges of his son's life, watching from afar, never daring to step into the world his boy had built without him. But today, something inside him had pushed him forward, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he could finally be seen, finally be embraced, finally be called father. His trembling fingers brushed against the polished wood of the door before he knocked, the sound faint but desperate. The door opened, and there she stood, his son's fiancée. Her face was beautiful, sharp, and cold, like marble. She looked him up and down, her eyes narrowing with disdain as if the sight of his worn clothes and tired eyes were an insult to her perfect home. For a moment, he hesitated, his lips dry, his throat tight, but then, summoning the courage he had hidden for decades, he whispered in a voice that cracked with age and emotion, "I'm your father." The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling, but instead of softening, her expression hardened. A cruel smile tugged at her lips. "Your father," she repeated, her tone laced with disbelief and mockery. "Do you think you can just show up here, in this state, claiming such a thing? Look at yourself. Do you belong in this house? Do you belong in his life?" Her voice was sharp, slicing through his fragile hope. Each word she threw at him felt like a stone hurled at a man who was already on his knees. He lowered his eyes, ashamed of the poverty that clung to him like a shadow, ashamed of the wrinkles etched into his face, the trembling of his hands, the shoes worn thin from years of walking alone. Yet, inside, he held memories no one could take from him. Nights spent working 3 jobs just to put food on the table, mornings where he kissed his son's forehead before leaving for work, sacrifices hidden in silence. He wanted to speak of them, wanted to scream that love had lived in every decision he ever made, but his voice betrayed him, breaking under the weight of years of regret. She stepped closer, her words dripping with venom. "You expect him to be proud of you, to call you his father. He has everything now, status, success, a future. And you are nothing but a burden, a shame, an embarrassment." She laughed, a sound that echoed in the hollow parts of his chest. The old man's eyes welled with tears, his frail body trembling not from weakness but from the crushing pain of rejection. He wanted to turn away, to retreat into the shadows where he had lived for so long, but something stronger than humiliation kept him rooted. It was love, the same love that had carried him through hunger, through loneliness, through the years when he had nothing but the dream of one day being reunited with his son. He whispered again, his voice shaking, "I'm his father. I only wanted to see him, just once, to tell him." His words broke, dissolving into silence. But she didn't care. She waved her hand dismissively, her face twisted in scorn. "Enough. Leave before you humiliate yourself any further. He doesn't need you. He doesn't want you. You're too late." Those last words pierced him deeper than any knife could. Too late. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the years of absence, the choices he had made, the sacrifices unseen, had all amounted to this moment of rejection. He felt the weight of time pressing down on him, each second reminding him of the moments he could never reclaim. Still, he stood there, silently enduring the storm of her cruelty, because his heart refused to let go of hope. And then, just as she turned to shut the door on him, another sound filled the air, a familiar voice, firm and urgent. "Who is at the door?" The old man froze, his breath caught in his throat. It was him, his son. Footsteps approached, quick and certain, and before the fiancé could stop him, the young man appeared. His eyes fell on the frail figure standing in the doorway, and in that instant, time seemed to stop. The son's gaze softened, confusion flickering into recognition. He saw the trembling hands, the tired eyes, the face that carried traces of his own. Something deep within him stirred, a memory long buried, the warmth of a hand holding his when he was small, the shadow of a man leaving early in the morning, the faint lullaby hummed on nights when the world seemed too heavy. The fiancée's face paled as she tried to interject. "It's no one important," she began quickly, but the son silenced her with a sharp glance. His eyes never left the old man's face. His heart beat faster, his chest tight with an emotion he could barely name. And then, like a dam breaking, the truth surged through him. "Father." His voice cracked, the word trembling between disbelief and longing. The old man's tears spilled freely now, his frail body shaking as he nodded. "Yes, yes, my son. It's me. I've missed you every day of my life." The son stepped forward, his arms trembling as he reached for the man who had been absent yet never forgotten. In that embrace, years of silence, pain, and longing dissolved. The fiancée stood frozen, her arrogance melting into shame as she realized the cruelty she had shown not to a stranger, but to the very man who had given life to the man she claimed to love. For the old man, the humiliation, the pain, the rejection, all of it faded the moment his son's arms wrapped around him. In that embrace, he was no longer just a frail, forgotten figure at the door. He was a father. He was loved. He was home. The young woman adjusted the shimmering bracelet on her wrist, her eyes fixed on the lavish table arrangements spread across the living room. Everything had to be perfect, because in her mind, perfection was what defined her place beside her fiancé. The world she wanted was one of glittering chandeliers, polished surfaces, and people who admired her. Anything less was a blemish on the image she worked tirelessly to maintain. So when the doorbell rang and she opened it to find an elderly man, hunched, weary, and dressed in faded clothes that spoke of hardship, her first instinct wasn't kindness, it was contempt. The man's eyes glistened with a mixture of hesitation and hope. His lips quivered as he whispered words that seemed to cost him every ounce of strength he had left. "I'm your father," he said, his voice cracking like brittle glass. For a moment she stared at him in disbelief, as though the very claim were an insult to her carefully crafted world. Then her lips curled into a mocking smile. "His father. You." She laughed, the sound sharp and merciless. "Do you see yourself? Look at your clothes, your hands, your face. Do you belong in this house? Do you think you belong in his life?" The old man lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumping under the weight of her words. He had expected rejection, but not such cruelty. He had imagined his son's fiancée to be graceful, gentle, perhaps the kind of woman who would help mend the wounds between him and his son. But instead, she treated him like dirt at her doorstep. Still, he could not turn away. His heart had carried him here, and though it bled with every insult, it refused to abandon the fragile hope that had brought him. She folded her arms, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you know who he is now? He has a reputation, a career, a future. Everything you clearly don't. You'll ruin him just by standing here. Do you want the neighbors to see this?" She gestured toward him with disgust, as if he were some shameful stain on their lives. His eyes filled with tears that burned but did not fall. He wanted to tell her about the sacrifices, the endless nights of work, the loneliness he endured to give his son a better life. He wanted to tell her how many meals he had skipped so his boy could eat, how many clothes he had patched to keep him warm, how many dreams he had set aside so his child could have his own. But the words stuck in his throat. He could not find the strength to defend himself, not when his heart was already breaking under the weight of her scorn. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a cruel whisper. "You are too late. If you were ever a father, you lost that right years ago. Leave now, before he sees you like this. He doesn't need the shame of your presence." The word, shame, echoed in his chest like a hammer. Shame had followed him for years. Shame of not having enough. Shame of being absent when his boy needed him most. Shame of failing in ways he never meant to. Yet he had never stopped loving his son, never stopped longing for the chance to see him again. That love was stronger than pride, stronger than pain, stronger even than the humiliation being heaped upon him now. He took a slow breath, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I just wanted to see him, just once, to tell him I never stopped loving him." The young woman rolled her eyes, shaking her head as though his words were nothing but noise. "Pathetic," she muttered. She moved to close the door, eager to erase him from the polished picture of her future. But before the latch could click, a familiar voice called from inside, steady and curious. "Who is it?" The old man froze, his heart thundering in his chest. That voice, it was the same voice that had once called him, Papa, in a tone full of innocence and trust. It was deeper now, stronger, but it was his son's voice all the same. The young woman stiffened, panic flashing in her eyes. She tried to push the door shut quickly, but it was too late. His son appeared at the doorway, tall, confident, dressed in clothes that spoke of success. For a brief second, the old man could not breathe. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, rehearsed what he might say, how he might explain his absence, but now that it was here, his mind went blank. He could only stand trembling, his eyes locked onto the face that carried fragments of his own youth. The son's gaze shifted between the two, confusion clouding his expression. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone firm. The fiancée quickly stepped in, her voice nervous but still laced with superiority. "No one important, just a beggar who..." But the old man's voice broke through, fragile but resolute. "I'm your father." Silence fell. The young man's eyes widened, his breath catching. For a long moment, he said nothing, only staring, as though the words had pulled him into a past he had buried too deeply to face. The fiancé placed a hand on his arm, trying to guide him back inside, but he brushed her off, his eyes never leaving the trembling figure before him. Memories stirred, faint but insistent. A calloused hand lifting him when he was small. A voice humming softly in the dark. The shadow of a man leaving for work before dawn. The ache of wondering where that man had gone. He had told himself over the years that those memories were too faded to matter, but now, standing face to face with the frail man who claimed him, they came rushing back with a force he could not deny. His lips parted, the word catching in his throat before it finally broke free. "Father." The old man's tears spilled over, his body shaking with sobs he had held back for years. "Yes," he whispered, his voice trembling with love and regret. "It's me. I know I failed you, I know I was gone, but I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." The young man's chest tightened, his heart caught between the wounds of the past and the undeniable truth of the present. Slowly, he stepped forward, his arms reaching out. The old man gasped as he was pulled into an embrace, his frail body clinging to the strength of the son he had missed for so long. The fiancée stood frozen, her face pale with shock and shame. The arrogance that once defined her crumbled as she realized the cruelty of what she had done. The man she had mocked, dismissed, and humiliated was not just some stranger, he was the father of the man she loved. And as she watched the two cling to each other, she understood that her heartlessness had no place in the bond that was being restored before her eyes. The old man wept openly, his tears falling against his son's shoulder. For the first time in years, the word, father, was not a memory, not a dream, but a reality. And for the son, holding the man who had once been lost to him, there was no shame, no resentment, only the overwhelming realization that love, though delayed, had found its way back home.